So now I want to take you to the opposite spectrum, where you've got somebody that's got more money than they know what to do with. And now I'm going to give you a case study that goes the other way to show that if you get an inheritance, or if you are blessed to win the lottery, or something happens, maybe you're a staff engineer and a company goes public and you have a lot of money, just because you're a smart person and you have money doesn't mean that something's going to work. And I'm going to take you through this a little bit. And so this is actually going to be a mini case study. And I found some information on something called Kitty Hawk. So, Kellyanne, what's Kitty Hawk in American history? What's Kitty Hawk?
I'm not sure.
You don't know what Kitty Hawk is? Google
No.
Kitty Hawk and tell me what comes up.
Okay.
Kitty Hawk is a very famous location located out on the sand of the Carolinas, sitting there, middle of nowhere. Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. And what happened at Kitty Hawk?
It's famous for its association with the Wright brothers.
The Wright brothers. The Wright brothers lifted off from Kitty Hawk. So, and who is Larry Page? A multi-billionaire, a deca-billionaire, who is one of the co-founders of Google. And so he names a company Kitty Hawk, where he wanted to eliminate traffic or mitigate traffic. And what he was envisioning was, very simply, a set of flying vehicles that could help us alleviate, traffic. And so he forms a company called Kitty Hawk. Now, I'm going to spoil it for you. Kitty Hawk crashed and burned in September of last year. After, I think it was 8 years, could have been 10. But nonetheless, here you have a smart guy, founder of Google, who goes out, has a whole lot of money and says, hey, I think I have an idea and I think I'm going to do something. So he goes out and said, let's basically build the flying car startup. Well, it was not hard for Larry to get a lot of PR out of that, not hard to get a lot of notoriety out of that, and get recognition. After all, I mean, you're one of the Google co-founders, so it's Google co-founder seeks out on flying car startup. You're going to get a lot of press, you're going to get a lot of attention. And so he went and recruited a guy to be his CEO. And the guy's name was Sebastian Thrun. And Sebastian was a really, really smart guy. And Sebastian had come from some very successful organizations. And they were out there, Kitty Hawk, man, we're going to be the Ford Motor Company of flying cars. And Sebastian's a smart guy. So let's take a look at how it happened. Because part of it was good, and part of it is a cautionary tale that if you do end up with a bunch of money in front of you, not every idea should be pursued. And I'm going to take you through some filters on that. So the first thing that happens is, you have Thrun, he's basically a German technologist. And he had a great reputation in robotics and early AI. He had run Waymo, W-A-Y-M-O, which was a navigation startup for electric cars. And he had also been a part of X, which was this internal wildcard division of Google. And so here he's out there, and everybody was wondering, this guy, Thrun, is very enthusiastic. He's very dynamic. And here you have Larry Page, who, if you've ever seen him, he's very much the engineer. He seems a little awkward. He's a little shy of the media. He's really not the guy out there who's trying to tweet every hour on the hour and put himself out there. So nonetheless, they said, hey, these guys are getting together and we're going to start Kitty Hawk. And what was really interesting is Thrun liked to hang out with everybody in Silicon Valley, and there was a story of a party that they had for Kitty Hawk that he actually brought Elizabeth Holmes to the party. And you know Elizabeth Holmes, you know who she is.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's inmate number 10642-5. Currently, you know, heading for the U.S. correctional facility near you. And she's been doing her best to get pregnant, stay pregnant, and do everything she can to stay out of prison. And recently a judge says, we're not having it. You're going to go do time because you defrauded all those Theranos investors. You know, you ex-entrepreneur. Now we know her as convicted felon and inmate. Nonetheless, you know, here's Thrun hobnobbing with the Silicon Valley people, Larry Page, a head-down engineer, and Thrun bringing Elizabeth Holmes to a party. Oh, that's the Theranos girl, and she's on the cover of Forbes and Fortune. And she's on the, what was the new police blotter for venture? The 30 under 30 list, because SBF was on it. You know, the girl, Charlie Javits, who sold Frank to JP Morgan. Anyway, all these folks end up on the Forbes 30 under 30. So, you know, 30 of them, 3 of them there. So there's a 10% chance if someone's on the 30 that they're probably going to go to prison someday. That's a statistical interpretation. That's not true, but this is how stats can make points. So nonetheless, Elizabeth Holmes is there. Thrun's out there talking vision, doing that, which is basically what Larry Page asked him to do. And so what was interesting is Page would come in every now and then saying, oh, I've got an idea. I've got another idea. You know, oh, let's do this. Let's do that. And then Thrun would come back to everybody after Larry left. And, you know, and they had these things. They said there'd be Larry visits and there'd be the meeting after Larry where Thrun would tell them, this is what we're doing. And really what was soon evident to people is there was a lot of research going on, but there really wasn't a tip of the spear on a single product that was going to get out. And before long, check this out. Kitty Hawk had taken $330 million in venture loans from One Arrow, which is Larry Page's shell company where he would do his angel investments. So wait a minute. Do you have any idea how difficult it would have been to get a flying startup to get $300 million of venture capital support? You better have somebody that worked at Boeing and somebody that worked at Ford and 7 PhDs, as well as somebody that works with the FAA on how you're going to get basically rights to fly, because the FAA governs everything that flies, because when planes crash, it's a big mess and they govern it. So wouldn't you think to get $330 million, this is our folks from the FAA, this is how we're going to fly, and we're not going to interfere with air traffic. These are our guys from vehicle companies. These are PhDs that understand all this stuff. And here's a guy that used to work at Boeing, which also, oh, by the way, makes things that fly. No, they didn't have that kind of pedigree. And nonetheless, they, you know, made a couple bucks on a special project for the U.S. Air Force. True, for the U.S. Air Force. And the rest of the time, they're basically burning through $330 million that came out of Larry Page's fund, One Arrow. And the business strategy became a point of tension with all the people, because they said there was no economic incentive for Larry. And the people would come to Thrun and say, what are we doing? What is the point of the project? Where are we going to take this? Where are we going? And remember where this little case study from BizDoc started. This is a guy who's really smart with a lot of money that doesn't have to go out and go through the sweat of raising money. Now they've got Kitty Hawk, you know, often in doing this, spending lots of money, and people would say, we feel like we would break our necks to get something done, and Larry would be like, oh, no problem, that was just an idea I had as part of, you know, the Kitty Hawk project. Then they said, well, we need to show something, we need to show some progress. And there's a lot of discontent, and people were like, we're going to go public and show something where we get all these ideas and some work, some don't. This feels more like a research lab than a company. And people are saying that's fine, but I'm not a PhD that came here to be part of a research lab. I came here to build a company around flying cars, which up on the wall it says that that's our strategy. But guess what? We're just kind of running around, and our founder doesn't have an economic incentive, because he's made all this money, to sit down and say, man, we've only got $1.5 million left. We got to go raise money and we got to make this work. We got to show some traction so we can raise the next level of venture funding, because that's the way this works. You've got an open spigot flowing money into this thing. So in 2018, they went out, Lake Las Vegas, and they brought a bunch of people out there, and they basically had a surfboard, some drone parts, and cobbled together and did a little bit of a demonstration where everybody was like, that is a demo of technology, kind of, that we cobbled together. Over here, we're talking about, the future of flying cars. And, during this, apparently somebody, told Forbes that, the vehicle that they were showing, the surfboard with these drone parts, had safety issues because the batteries that were on it were very compressed and intense, and they had a risk of causing a fire. Great. So your Uncle Louis gets in one of these things to fly to work, bursts into flames, Louis goes down, Louis dead, and you just dropped, batteries that are on fire that are very hard to put out, that probably started a ground fire somewhere. So they didn't even have anything that you could say in the video game world is a first playable or a prototype or an alpha. They didn't have it. And so they would get all this media attention with the journalists that came out to cover what Kitty Hawk was doing out at Lake Las Vegas on this brutally hot day, and nothing really was put together. They then built this reception area in Redwood Shores so that they could do media briefings. So you can see what's happening here. And the company soon was trying to turn down the amount of money it was spending, and the whole notion of flying cars suddenly drifted off and came to a halt. People said that what started happening is that Larry started making fewer and fewer visits to Kitty Hawk, and Thrun was making more and more explanatory all-hands meetings explaining what Larry thought or what Larry wanted. And finally, in the end, in February of 22, suddenly, after all of that I just described in 21, Larry suddenly shows up and he's driving hard, but it's like an idea a minute. And after 5 months of this, Larry leaves and an email goes out to everybody about an all-hands meeting. And Thrun says, September of 2022, and they put a tweet out, Kitty Hawk was shutting down and it's done. They never achieved much. And Larry Page did not attend the meeting. So what is the lesson here? I think there's a big lesson for us. So I just talked about the savings rate in America, and if you haven't got the money, it's hard to start something. But there is something to be said for having to scrap and kick to prove your product, your vision, your company is something. And in the case of Kitty Hawk, it goes the other way. All the money in the world won't get you two things. Focus. You had a founder in Larry Page that basically did this as a research lab and hired Thrun to run it. And there was no product, nor was there probably a real market. Would people like to be done with traffic? Sure. But is a flying car going to be the way to do it with all the stuff that, that goes with that? I don't know. I don't know if it really is. And so you can have a bunch of money that maybe you get in an inheritance. You may have a bunch of money, maybe you win the lottery. Maybe a company you're with gives you a giant bonus to leave, or it goes public and you had some stock options. Be very careful before you just say, hey, I'm going to build a company. Where does that product come from? Where does that idea come from? And you could have all the money in the world, but if you don't have a refined idea and the focus, you're going to crash and burn. And that's what happened with Kitty Hawk.